Let me ask you a question. Who is the greatest person that you personally know or have known? And perhaps think about what it is that makes you say that. So, in preparing for this chat, I thought I should ask that question, and maybe you're finding it's not quite as easy as it sounds when you first hear it. So I came across my 8-year-old daughter Ruby in the passage, and I said to her, Ruby, who's the greatest person that you know? And without much thought, she said, probably myself. So her mother's obviously done something right. I asked my 13-year-old daughter Sage the same question, and she was much more anguished about the answer. What do you mean, and what is greatness? And anyway, I said eventually, if I pushed you for an answer, what would you say? And she said, probably Grandpa. And of course I was on a roll, so off to my wife. And she, as a thoughtful person she is, said, probably everyone, because everyone has some greatness in them. And finally, on the Monday, I chatted to my business partner, and I was hoping he would say me, but sadly not. And he said it's his mentor who has been giving selflessly of his time to help other people succeed in the world. So, the first thing I want to talk about is how I've always been intrigued by this idea of greatness. I've had my self-help stage, as I'm sure many of you have. I've been on the Primal Warrior Men's Weekend. I've been coached. I've been to psychotherapy. Some might say I should ask for my money back. But it's through conversations with a great mentor of mine who's in the crowd today, who, over many, many glasses, and in fact cases, of chilled Sauvignon Blanc, we had many philosophical conversations about this idea of greatness. And what I soon realized is that you need some kind of conceptual framework to be able to know what you're talking about. You need a hook to hang your hat on if you want to aspire to greatness. And I do think, as I'm sure many of you will, that there is no reason not to aspire to greatness. I think those of us who are in this room have obviously got a certain level of resources and wisdom and knowledge and access. And I feel like it's our moral obligation to use those assets to make a positive impact on the world. So on this journey, there were two people who were very useful in this conceptual framework that I hope you might find useful. This is Friedrich Nietzsche, lived in the 18th century, a German philosopher. And you can see even back then, he was a very avid supporter of Movember. And he can be seen as the father of this greatness idea. He spoke of the Übermensch, or Übermenschlichkeit, which literally translated talks to the point of overhumanness or meta-humanness, and I think has subsequently been slightly bastardized to inspire Superman, the superhero with superpowers. But he said it's not about having superpowers, it's about being able to synthesize a unity of opposites. In fact, he went so far as to say that one must have chaos within one. And when I read that, I thought, if that's a characteristic, I could quite possibly be the greatest person who's ever lived. But sadly, my wife will tell you that's very much not the case. So Nietzsche then very much inspired this idea of a unity of opposites, that we need to not think in either or, like good and evil, or rational or emotional, or introverted or extroverted, but it's about bringing these together that is the process of greatness. This is Carl Jung, lived in the 19th century. Many of you will be familiar with Jungian psychology. I'm sure many of you have done an MBTI personality assessment. And you'll see that he was a slightly less enthusiastic advocate of Movember, but we won't hold that against him. And he spoke about this idea of individuation, which is the process of self-actualizing by integrating our conscious and our unconscious, which, if you think, obviously heavily influenced by Nietzsche, it's very much the same conceptual idea. It's bringing these two opposites together. And Jung is very much, can be seen as the father of the human potential movement. All those self-help books you've read, I'll bet that at least some of it's been inspired by Jungian thought. And he said that greatness exists in everyone. The trick is just, how do we get it out? So what Nietzsche created was a wonderful metaphor, which can help us give ourselves this hook to hang our hat on. And that is of the bow. So he said, the greatest human is the bow with the greatest tension. And that is about pulling that bow and getting that drawing power, that conflict of these two opposite points on a continuum, which is what gives us that energy to metaphorically shoot our arrow into the world and be impactful and to make a positive difference. So what both Nietzsche and Jung discovered was that greatness is the process through which all of these opposites are synthesized in a creative, a considered, and an intelligent way. And they both showed us that great people are both and thinkers. They are never either or thinkers. It's about bringing these opposite ideas together and finding the middle ground, that tension. So obviously, in that case, greatness doesn't mean you have to be exceptional at everything. In fact, Jung went as far as to say completion is better than perfection. So it's really about doing rather than thinking that will make us great. You could look at this as a mixing desk where, depending on the situation you're in, you're moving the dials up and down on different parts of our personality and different things that we're using in the world. So, for example, in one situation, you may be a lot more emotional and rational, or more conscious than subconscious, or more individual than team-based in a certain situation. But in another situation, that picture might be completely different. And it's really about surfing this wave of these opposing forces, this bow, where we become an archer for ourselves and where we become a bow maker for those around us that we can take on this journey with us. So there's three maps that might be useful. And you might think of them as three arrows in your quiver. The first is to know yourself. And I mentioned the MBTI before, but there are many assessment tools that you can use to become a little more conscious of who are you as a person. What are your preferences? What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? What should you be going into from a work point of view or a hobby point of view, where these things can be synthesized in a way that is redemptive and useful to the world and yourself. The other is to know others, because greatness is a team sport, not a solo pursuit. And in knowing others, as you know yourself, you'll be able to get people who you can both help fill in their gaps and weaknesses, and similarly get others to help complement your strengths and weaknesses as well. And finally, to know the environment you're in. If you're going to become a political leader, it's going to be very important that you understand how politics works. If you're going to become a religious leader, the same applies. Understand the religious origins and the way that structure works. Or if you're going to be a business person, understand how business works. Know what a business model is. Understand the economy, and so on. So here's an example of one of these maps about knowing yourself and others. And Great people have four conflicting capacities. The first is reality. They have the ability to have no illusions. Archetypally, we can think of this as the good king. We also need courage, which is the ability to act with sustained initiative. Similarly, we need to tap into our magician, to have vision, to think new and big. And also ethics, to be of service to others, to be social, to have Ubuntu, which can be archetypally seen as the earth mother or the earth, or the lover, rather. And obviously, between these points, there's great tension. Between a magician and a good king, there is huge tension. And if you're a magician and you work with a good king, I guarantee you irritate one another enormously. Similarly, between the warrior and the earth mother, you can feel that tension, that bow that happens. And all of us have these capacities, and all of us have a preference. So you'll see, I need some work on my good king, but I'm quite happy to daydream and have visions. But you need to bring these things all together and synthesize them in a clever and creative way. And great people are people who are able to expand all of these dimensions of what already exists within us outwards in the world, both for ourselves and for others. So ultimately then, both and can roughly equate to greatness. And I challenge you to think of where you might be thinking either or, and consider what might happen if you thought both and. If we think of the world we live in terms of an economic system, on one of these points of the continuum, we've got the free market fundamentalist capitalist pigs. On the other side, we've got these do-gooding socialists. But maybe, just maybe, if we bring those 2 points together, maybe in the synthesis of those ideas, there might be a more redemptive outcome for all of us. Similarly, I know myself, I have these great moments where I think, I'm going to become a vegan. But I just love that slab of steak too much. And there again, I realize I trapped myself in either or thinking. How about having meat-free Mondays? Or if you're a vegetarian for half of the week and you eat 17 kilograms of steak for the rest of the week. Similarly, this idea of being an entrepreneur, it's a hot topic. You're almost seen as a bit of a failure if you don't run your own business. But how many haven't we seen where people cash in their pensions and open a coffee shop and they're bankrupt within a year? How about keeping your job and getting a side hustle? And if and when that side hustle starts to pay your salary, then resign. It's not about putting all your chips on number 16 at the roulette table. Similarly with work and rest, I think there's this societal badge of honor we wear if we're exhausted and burnt out and hectic. If I have $1 for every time I say I'm hectic, I'd be very wealthy. But really, we hear our true selves when we're resting. And just like that continuum, we have to find where on this point. And obviously, sometimes we'll work hard, and sometimes we'll rest hard. But how can we perhaps bring those things together in slightly more synthesized creative balance? The wonderful thing about this journey of greatness is that it's a destination that can never be reached. It's a process that never ends. And I'd like to encourage you to ask yourself, where am I trapped in either or thinking? And what might I unlock if I can create this dynamic synthesis, this conflict, this tension of the bow into a both-and thought process and action? So let's challenge ourselves. Let's be both an archer and a bow maker.